So, welcome to the Business of Innovation. I'm Gail DePriest, and my guest today is Andy DeLeone. And Andy, I want to welcome you back to Greenville.
Thank you.
I know that you started in Greenville, or you were here with GE in Greenville many years ago. And
some of the best years of my life.
So it's great to welcome home for coming back to Greenville, and we're thrilled that you're spending some time with us. So catch us up a little bit on, since you were here working with Greenville GE, what's happened since then?
Yeah, it's a lot's happened. So I got to Greenville 2010. I left at the end of 2013, and I was intending to move, and I did move to upstate New York, close to where I'm from, to take another job inside of GE, actually doing something similar to what I was doing in Greenville, just on a little bit bigger scale. And then about 4 months later, as often happens in this incredible company, I was actually in the desert in Saudi Arabia. We had a repair facility there, serving our customers in the Gulf region primarily. And I got a phone call from my boss and said, hey, the company would be curious to know if you would be interested in moving to Africa. And, I had just moved I just taken this new job like 3-4 months ago. I was enjoying it. And certainly I never considered, but hey, just think about it on the flight home, and we'll talk about it on Monday. And so it was just a couple months later, I ended up moving to Nairobi. And since that move, I've lived in Nairobi, Johannesburg, Zurich, Delhi, and now moved back to Switzerland just a few weeks ago. So I'm on country number 4 or 5 here since I left Greenville. But a place that I always love to come back to.
Greenville. Interesting. Well, talk a little bit about, Andy, how do you manage the cultural aspect of things? And I remember through the years you've spoken to my students and you've given them such sage advice about going into other countries and other companies in other countries. Talk a little bit about the cultural aspect.
Yeah, I think a few things. One, you can overthink it a bit, and I urge people not to do that. I think being authentic, so being yourself, first and foremost, is what people want and expect of you anywhere in the world. I'd say secondly, for whatever reason, I've developed a bit of a curiosity around what goes on in parts of the world that are unfamiliar to me and not where I'm from. And I just love the process of learning and understanding those communities, those environments, those national cultures, and really the people that make them up. And I think the combination of your own personal authenticity with a lot of curiosity is a pretty good starter. And I think as you do it more often, you start to appreciate that there's a lot happening that you don't understand in those cultures. I think especially for me in India, at times it was very challenging, and I actually grew to appreciate that I didn't really know a lot that was happening around me from a national culture standpoint. And there's so much idiosyncrasies that only someone who's really grown up in that culture, or spent really a long time in that culture, would appreciate. So you sort of also have to have the humility, and I've learned this often the hard way, you have to have the humility to step back and say, hey, I don't really know, and lean on your teams, trust other people, and sort of not think you're the smartest guy in the room. But I think some combination of those three. But I'd say for someone who's just starting their journey in kind of global careers or global explorations, authenticity and curiosity gets you like 90% of the way there. And then as you spend more time, you start to appreciate how much you don't know.
Sure. One of the things that you have said is you've made a lot of changes. You love learning.
Yeah.
And you, at some point since you left Greenville, made the shift from being actually in human resources to being the
to running a business and
running the business for GE in India and other places.
Yep.
And so how did you decide to do that? How did that happen?
Well, so first I would say it wasn't. I wasn't running away from the HR function. I love the function, and hope to work in it again one day, and we'll see how kind of my career takes its shape. But I loved the work the function did and wasn't looking to leave, I would say, is the first thing. And actually, a lot of the foundational skills that I learned around, I would say, accountability, performance management, culture building, those were a lot of the things that I leaned back on in an operating job. So a great place to start. I wish more HR professionals, number one, raise their hand to do something in the line, do something in operating capacities. And I also wish that operating leaders sometimes looked more to their HR people to take those moves. And I happen to be blessed that the individual that I was working for and his boss had really gotten to know me for several years. And when there was a role that emerged, they had the confidence in me to go and do that. And I always tell people, it really only these two people would have given me that chance. I was super lucky to be around those people who had enough confidence in faith and trust in me and belief to do that. And I'll never forget the first conversation I had about it, because I knew immediately when we had the conversation I would want to go do it. I knew, it was a process of, is it really the right thing, and having a lot of good introspective discussions with people. But I knew in my gut right away I wanted to do it, and wanted to challenge myself and wanted to see, if I could be successful. And
exactly what was the assignment?
Yeah, so the business, I was working a part of GE Power. And it was a part of GE Power that we had acquired from a company called Alstom, a French company, at the end of 2015. And this part of the business built, and everyone who's listening to this or will listen to this will cringe here, especially in South Carolina. Our business, we built, maintained, serviced coal and nuclear power plants. And if you read the New York Times, you would think that there was never ever going to be another coal-fired power plant built in the world, and that it was one of the worst things that we possibly could be doing to the planet. And there's some elements of that are fair, but the reality is actually it's the fuel that delivers the most of the world's electricity generation comes from coal and nuclear. And in emerging parts of the world, like India, where hundreds of millions of people, it's hard to even imagine that, hundreds of millions of people do not have access to reliable power. And it's a country that's blessed with a lot of coal, and the only way for that country in the short term, medium term, to bring modern life to 1.3 billion people, and to generate industry and to build a society that country is very capable of having, is burning their natural resources of coal. So actually, we have a pretty big business, and there's a pretty big business going on in primarily in Southeast Asia, India, that's still about building and maintaining and servicing large coal-fired power stations. And I went to really run GE's business that was doing that work in India. And I was based in Delhi. And while I never intended, I have to tell you, never in my life did I think I'd work for a company, building and running coal-fired power stations. And oftentimes I had to really reflect on, is what we're doing good for the world that myself and my family and my children and, will be a part of, hopefully for a long time. But what I found in India, and why the assignment was so meaningful to me, was actually what I saw our customers were doing was nation building. I mean, our customers were nation building. Things that we, were very fortunate in South Carolina and much of this country to take for granted. Those things were fundamentally not taken for granted in India. They were luxuries. Clean water, reliable access to power, clean air. These things simply didn't function. And it has a huge reverberation on the ability of a society to emerge. And I actually found great purpose in working with my 2,000 colleagues in GE Power in India to help our customers take India to really the next generation of growth and its development. So Amazing experience. We were executing, 40 or 50 projects around the country. We had 3 manufacturing facilities. We have 700 or so engineers developing products and then servicing these power stations to make them cleaner, more reliable, more efficient, and life-changing opportunity for me, and every day humbling what our customers were trying to do for their country.
So it sounds like it was very gratifying for you in terms of just what the whole country was trying to accomplish, to move to kind of a different level, and
Absolutely.
you were really a part of helping them.
I think some of that got awakened for me when I was in Africa, because if you're 25 years old and you live in Johannesburg, you believe deeply inside of you, and actually it's a very interesting time in South Africa right now as they move to elect their the next president of the country. You're 25 years old in Johannesburg. You believe fundamentally in your lifetime you are going to change the direction of your country and your continent. And I was so amazed in Africa at this spirit of accountability and responsibility from young people. It's my generation that's going to shape this country, shape this continent. And I found so much of that spirit as well in India, a little bit farther in the developmental journey as a country, but in this same spirit of we're shaping this country. And I have to say, I really want to work for the rest of my life and my career in places and with teams that with this kind of spirit. It doesn't mean it has to be in those locales, but this spirit of we think we're building the future. We're building a lot better future for people that otherwise wouldn't have it. And I still think companies like GE, although it's a company that has had a tough couple years if you only read the headlines in newspapers. But I think the work that gets done by thousands of people here in Greenville, South Carolina, and so many parts of the world, that's exactly what those people are trying to do. They're bringing modern life, they're creating modern life in parts of the world that simply don't have it.
Andy, thank you for sharing that. And as you were talking about that, I'm reminded that you are kind of recalibrating right now and thinking about, what's your next venture? What do you really want to do going forward? And you've had some incredible experiences, and you've seen a lot of places and endeavors. What are you thinking about next? You're going to be, I guess, living in Zurich.
Yep.
And you love the city of Zurich. Yeah. So talk a little bit about where you are now.
Yeah. So I think so first, I spent 14 years at GE, 7 countries, 4 continents. I grew up in, as you know, Gail, I grew up in upstate New York, and as I've talked to a lot of your students about over the years, I grew up in a family of American football coaches. It's one of the reasons I love coming to Clemson, South Carolina. And my father and my brother, they've went to the highest levels of their profession, and but I grew up in an environment of we weren't international travelers. I grew up in a community that was, I would not say highly multicultural. And what I've gotten to experience, really thanks to GE and thanks to leaders that I've gotten a chance to work around, have completely changed, my life. And so one, I'm building on that, and I'm very mindful of how thankful I am and appreciative I've been. So I'd say as I kind of look, forward. It's a period for me. One, I've spent so much investment in my professional life, in my own personal growth as an individual, but I'm really eager to start a family, and that's something that if I'd say there's priority 1, it's that, and I'm lucky enough to have met an amazing woman to do that with. So I'd say that's that's number 1 in my mind right now.
Yay, good for you.
And then I'd say number 2 is. I'm excited to continue. What I learned a lot in India was we were away. I started to, I think, increasingly in my career, get away from kind of the center of the company and more in the perimeter, of the company. And I think what I learned in the perimeter is that what I love is the work. I love the day-to-day, the week-to-week, the grind that comes with it. and what the work we did for our customers. So as I think about what I want to do next, I'm really eager to work for an enterprise that I would say is focused on delivering value for customers, lives external, isn't too consumed with itself, is consumed with delivering for people outside the four walls of the company. And I don't want to stop doing work that I called nation building. And I think that's what, since I left New York in the early part of 2014, 5 years ago, and moved to sub-Saharan Africa, that spirit is something I never hope leaves me. And the type of organizations that I intend to work with in the future, I think that deep sense of purpose is one I hope to find as well in those places, and expect I will.
I read a quote recently. It was something like, in the past it's been about muscle at work, and then for a period of time it was about brain, but in the future, winning at work will be about heart.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of hearing you say that it's more about heart and purpose in terms of what you're delivering.
Well, trust, and I think this has been a trend that's been building, but I mean, I think we know trust in favorability of large institutions in general is at unbelievably low levels in almost all elements of our society. That's just not big companies. It's government. It's big institutions in general, and I think some of that emanates from a belief that some people have that says, hey, these enterprises, these institutions, aren't worried about me, and aren't worried about my problems and the challenges that I see every day in my life. And I think that companies have to be deeply attuned to the environments in which they work, not only the needs of their customers, which maybe not all are as much as they should all the time, but deeply attuned to the needs of really the entire ecosystem in which that company operates. I just think people are fed up with an enterprise that doesn't do that. Not only people who work there, but just broadly the stakeholders of the enterprise. Just people don't tolerate it anymore. And the frustration is big.
Yeah. You touched on your dad and the coaching aspect in your family. And so I have two questions from that. I want to know, first of all, and then you touched on your love for Clemson. Talk about your love for Clemson just a little bit, because I've known that about you as long as I've known you, and yet you went to other schools. You went to Cornell and I think Wharton.
Very different places.
Yeah. What is that about, the Clemson thing?
Well, I could say so much. One, I was lucky to go to some great schools. And I think Clemson, in its journey, what I've always loved about it was it didn't try to be anybody else but Clemson. And I hope we never lose that spirit. In our quest to grow and expand our impact, which we definitely should, and I say we because I really feel a part of the community. We should do it in our own way. And actually, I think that's why I'm a bit of a follower of the profession. I'm a bit of a believer of that's also why your football coach has been so successful. He hasn't done it anyone else's way. He did it his way. And I think that authenticity permeates everything that he's been about, and everything about the program's been about, and the success I think has followed. When you try to use a recipe book, typically that's not the formula for success in those type of endeavors. So I loved Clemson. The day I moved here from London, and it was a time in my life when, actually I needed a bit of a hug from the place I lived. I had lived in London for about 2 years. It was a very difficult couple years professionally. We were doing very difficult work. It was a bad economic cycle, 2008. 9 and 10, a really bad economic cycle. I was doing some lousy work. I would not say inspiring work. And I needed a bit of, and I had some challenges, personally. My mother had passed away. I needed a bit of a hug. And what I found in Greenville was just both, it always starts with people, but people, and then broadly a community that just embraces you. And I think cared about me And I'm from the north, and I think everyone who meets me here would not mistake me from growing up in the upstate South Carolina. But I think the community just embraced me, and I was so appreciative of that, and I needed it at that time in my life. And we also set out to do some challenging work in our GE factory here in Greenville that was not always well received, but we were trying to lay the foundation of the sort of the factory had been here 30 plus years at that time, almost 40 years, had an amazing history. And what we talked about was we want to sow the seeds of this place for the next 40 years. The world's different. We wanted to do that. And what I found was just a community of people who embraced that vision and were supportive to us in that vision. And I just felt that there was so much magic here. And then, but what I loved and what I had shared with you before is everyone's invested in the success of Greenville. I think if you live here, like I had been, GE does United Way. GE does United Way in Greenville, and everyone's in the game.
Yeah.
Everyone participates. And and they don't do it because they feel obligated, their arm twisted. They do it because they feel accountable and responsible for how the community, develops. So I love the place, and I'll always come back to visit. It'd be amazing to live here again. Let's see if the future opens those type of doors. You never say never. So I have a deep passion for the place, and it's always a place. When I tell people, hey, where have you really loved to live? I always tell people Zurich and Greenville.
Wow.
Zurich and Greenville.
But I'm intrigued with something you said. You said it's so important for the business school to be authentic, because you feel like that's one of the factors. It's not just about being copying others.
Yeah, I went to Wharton. It's an amazing place, and the leaders that place has built, and the machine that propels it is truly incredible, and has really made transformational impact on industries and thought processes and finance and other domains. But it's true to who it is. And I think Clemson, as it grows and has a bigger and bigger impact in the Southeast, but also nationally, I think we should stay true to who we are. And I don't think, I guess if I was sitting here and sat in a strategy session with the leadership team of Clemson, I wouldn't sit there and say, hey, let's benchmark against, X, Y, or Z business school who we want to be. I don't think that's the way I would start that strategy session. I would probably be inspired by stories of how this community has built itself, some of the companies that have taken shape in this region, some of the local culture of, I'd say, giving and faith and gratitude that emerges when you're here. And I think that would inspire me how I would think about the strategy of the place, vis-a-vis saying, hey, I'm super impressed with HBS, and let's follow a path like that.
Right. Thank you. That's a great observation. I really inspired.
No one from the leadership team of Clemson is interested in my opinion on that, but
well, I'm interested. But
that's my view.
So I do want to ask you about your dad and how your dad has influenced your thinking as a leader.
Well, so if you don't mind, my father is so passionate about what he does. I mean, he loves working with young people.
And you might want to give his background.
Sure.
Our listeners know.
Yeah, so my father is an American football coach. I say American football coach in Europe. I should just say football coach. He's a football coach. He's an offensive line coach, which the good news about your listeners is I don't have to explain to them what the offensive line does. He's an offensive line coach, and he's been doing it for he's 71, and he's still coaching. He's at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. And he's been doing this, for almost 50 years now. And, it's all he ever wanted to do. It's all he ever wanted to do. He grew up in Connecticut, grew up in a family of his father drove a truck His mother was a nurse. And he grew up in a working class family, and he's a working class person. So he believes in work. He believes in team. He believes that what you put in is what you get out, and you have a choice to make every day. You can make a choice to be good. You can make a choice to be average. You can make a choice to be great, but it's a choice. And I think I've grown, and I think I've learned a lot about that approach from him. And you get what you put in. Now, what I was going to say is my father, he was blessed to find something he loves, and he really works at it. And through that, as I grew up with him, the thing that was amazing in my family is I had a mother who sacrificed her life to myself and my younger brother. Mm-hmm. And I also think made my father and enabled him to follow his dreams and live his dreams. But that woman really raised us. And I mean, she did everything for us. And this is a woman who had a master's degree from Michigan. Mm-hmm. I mean, highly talented, capable person, could have done, really anything she wanted to do, but loved my father, wanted him to be able to pursue what he was so passionate about, but at the same time, dedicated, every minute of every day to the development of myself and my younger brother, Mark. And so I can't talk about my father without talking about my mother because, they go hand in hand. And for the imprint that they've had on my life, you simply couldn't do it with one. So my younger brother, he followed in the family tradition. So I'm kind of the least popular guy at family reunions, So he's a linebackers coach of the Chicago Bears. Which is a pretty cool job to be the linebackers coach of that history. Mike Singletary, Dick Butkus, and now my brother's coach of linebackers of the Bears. He's 5 years younger than me, and he has such an incredible future, and he's earned it. He's earned this. And what I'm amazed by watching them is the commitment and the intensity around the foundations and fundamentals of excellence. Mm-hmm. So in the line of work that I get to do, I have found it, what's inspired me is how broad and diverse it is every day. What these guys do, the level of detail that they go into to prepare their players and their athletes to be their very competitive best on Sunday afternoon is absolutely incredible. The level of detail and preparation, in its millimeters, its inches, its split seconds that they prepare all week to do. And I sometimes I reflect back on how I run the company I was running and say, how do we learn from that degree of excellence? I mean, never being satisfied, this incredible dedication of preparation to be at your competitive best for 3 to 5 seconds for 40 plays on a Sunday afternoon. My brother spends 90 hours a week getting ready for his players for 3 to 5 seconds, 40 times on Sunday to be at their competitive best. It is the myopic focus. And I think all of us can learn from that in sort of how do we be at our competitive best in the fields that we choose to go.
Interesting, the comparison between the kind
Couldn't
of the
be
work.
more different, but I learn a lot from those guys.
It's very different.
I learn a lot from those guys.
And as you were talking about teams, I wanted to ask you kind of how you define when you're working with a team and you want to bring out the best in them and you want them to share their ideas and as you said, keep making things, improving and making things better. How do you create a team that feels safe to innovate at the degree of innovation or risk, within the company that's tolerated? But how do you build that team to do that?
Well, there's a lot of things you said, Gail. I'd say first, teams today, it's not about number one, it's not about who works for you. I think the biggest thing that's changed in the 14, 15 years I worked at GE was, you should never define your impact and your responsibility based on how big your organization is, who works for you, et cetera. And I think the modern team is a very fluid thing. So I'm a believer of you define team around mission. So I think step one in what's a team and how do you bring a best out of that team is mission. What's the mission? What's the outcome? What's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the customer expectation we're trying to deliver for? So I think step one, and that became really clear to me when I was outside of HR, when I was in a business job, is because customers are pretty straightforward in what they expect from you. And so all the noise kind of slides off the table in what a customer expects. And I think it helps mobilize an organization kind of outside in what we need to be focused on. And so one, mission. I would say two, I'm a believer of a little bit of this is what I've picked up a little bit from football, but I'm a believer of you should let people be individuals. I'm a believer of edicting, a certain way to a person, especially a really talented person, a strong-minded person, is a pretty good way to not get the best out of that person, to kind of damper their personal stimulus for growth. And so I'm a bit of a believer of you as the leader have to tolerate a bit of what I'd say constructive conflict, dissent, and a bit of individualism on your team. I think if you kind of mandate, hey, we do things one way, then you simply don't get the best from your people. I'd say it's number two. And then I'd say 3 and 4. I'd say 3 would be the behavior that you model as a leader in the way your organization models it. If you say one thing, but the people in your company observe yourself and your peers and the leadership team valuing something different. I mean, your words are empty, and I think that you don't get a belief of, hey, I can fail fast and learn, and everyone says they want you to fail fast, learn, but then the minute someone fails, there's a brutal discussion from the leader. I mean, everyone on the team, that signal, breaks down 6 months of effort to try to build a culture. And I think lastly, care more about the what's right for your people than what's right for your company. Brings you into a flywheel of success in the long run. I heard a great quote, actually, when I was living here, from John Calipari, the basketball coach at Kentucky. A lot of people don't like John Calipari. And he was talking about how his most proud day as basketball coach was when he had 5 of his players picked in the first round of the National Basketball Association draft, not when they won the national championship. So hang on a second. You're the coach of Kentucky. You're supposed to care about Kentucky winning. His point was, hey, that day saw 5 of my players reach a moment in their life that they could have almost never dreamed of growing up. And if a whole bunch of other people look and see that's the outcome for people when you go to Kentucky, or you see that the basketball program and the coach cares more about their individual success and the development than what's best for him and his program, to me, that attracts the best people, and you get more and more people who want to be a part of your system. Instead of you trying to hold on to you should instead let your people flourish. And so I think some of those things, as I've learned, is allowed people to be creative, be at their competitive best. But it's easier said than done. And I've made a bunch of mistakes in all 4 of those things in my leadership career. But I think those are some of the things I've seen.
But what I'm really hearing you say is putting the best interest of those individual players, really honoring that, really valuing that for them.
Yeah.
Because people see that as you are doing it for that individual, but other people observing that, no, they get that.
For sure. And I think about it like, I think about my brother. So my brother joined the Chicago Bears 2-3 months ago. Okay, so he joins the Bears, and he has a few players on his team that are elite players. I mean, they are one, multimillionaires. Two, they're as good as anyone else at what they do in the National Football League. They meet my brother, who's 31 years old, who's never played one down of football in college or pro. And, the mindset my brother brings to that is, I just want to help you be your best.
Right.
I want to help you be the very best you can be. And I don't have any other prerogative. I got no other agenda. I want you to be the best. And I think that player hears that and says, okay, let's give this guy a chance. If his interests are to make me better and make me excel, and I think that's, as a leader, as a coach, as anything that you do, if you take that approach, people you typically give you a chance.
So I want to ask a question about you. What is it that you like about yourself as a leader, and what is it that you might not like about yourself as a leader? What might you struggle with?
That was a long list of things I don't. Look, Gail, I would say what I like. No one on my team, no one that's ever worked for me, would tell you that they didn't know where my heart was, where they didn't know where my passion lied, what I believed in, and that knew that I would be with them to the absolute end as we pressed forward to try to deliver outcomes for customers or outcomes for our organization. I think there's no one would ever doubt that. And I think I've been fortunate enough to have people in my organizations that liked that type of spirit. I think things that I don't like and things that I always want to get better at is, look, I have a very, very high expectation for myself and a very, very high expectation for my team. And there's times when I think I've just pushed too hard. There's times when, I should have moderated my intensity level, my expectation level, from where we were as an organization, and could have met people more in the middle of where they were versus where I wanted them to be. And I think that those are things as I kind of grow and take future roles in bigger and bigger enterprises or bigger and bigger missions. I think I'll think a lot about how we do that and the type of culture that I want to build there. But a very, very high expectations for people. And typically...
including yourself, is what
including myself. It starts with myself. And I think typically what I found is that brings the very, very best out in people. But I got to make sure that the journey for those individuals in that process, is one of self-discovery and enrichment, and doesn't pass, too far into this is really hard, And I
do you consider yourself to be a disruptor?
Well, I would say I'm a bit of a inherent skeptic of what I hear, and typically dig and ask questions, and don't usually accept the status quo. Is that being a disruptor? I think it's constantly working in pursuit of can we be better, versus an innate desire to disrupt. I think the world there's so much competitive pressure in the world, and the world's moving so fast. I'm sort of not a believer of if it's not broken, don't fix it. I'm a believer of you really should challenge where you are and how you operate as an organization, as a team, to see if can you reach for even broader heights. And I've just never been around a place that when you dig deep, you couldn't get better.
Sure. So, in that vein, what is a best book you've read lately? A book that you might recommend to our listeners who want to learn and grow and innovate and be their best?
It's a good question. So a few I would just say, but I'd say the one maybe that I would say everybody should read about. I would say modern, larger organizations. So many of us work in, medium to large organizations. But a book called Team of Teams, written by Stanley McChrystal, is to me as good of a blueprint to leading in a disruptive, fast-pacing, changing world where hierarchies and strong systems work against you more than they work for you. I think it's just an absolutely outstanding book, and I also think it's very practical, and it can apply in so many different settings. His angle is a bit military, but it's so applicable to some of the dynamics that I saw in GE, and actually infused a lot of the principles by which we've ran our organization the last 3-4 years. I think it's a treasure of modern day management.
So curious to know, what's the best advice you ever received?
I'd say professionally, when I joined GE, the advice that I got from sort of the individual that was leading the HR function at the time, a guy named Bill Conity, who's really a legend in HR, an unbelievable HR person and operational person. And the guy, what was amazing about this guy was he had as good a relations with unions and union leaders as he did with CEOs. I always thought this was amazing. He could build a chasm. You could kind of connect the chasm in sort of people who had very different interests. He told me, he said, go take jobs that no one else wants to take. Take tough jobs that no one else wants to take. And I tried to do that early in my career. Rolled up my sleeves, went to tough places, challenged myself. And I think what I learned through that process was just the journey of sort of leadership and of kind of discovery is really one that is within yourself. But you don't enter that journey if you stay in comfortable situations.
You mentioned faith earlier. I'm just curious to know, is that something that really sustains you, helps you? You touched on that.
Yeah, I think that it is something that as I kind of go to the next, it really does feel like the next phase of my life. It's a part of me, Gail, that I'm excited to spend more time on. I think that when you've run around the world as much as I have, you sometimes your focus becomes on the work you're doing and kind of sustaining your body. And I think that a bit of what I'm excited about today is investing more time in my soul and that part of me. And so it's a big part of how I want to move forward. And it's just been the last days and weeks have been very reflective for me in that way.
And I think that's the beauty of any transition is you get a chance to step back and breathe and reflect and really think about what you're curious about now and what you really want to explore now. And so what else are you curious about as you get this moment to think on that?
Well, I think it's almost too early to answer the question, in the sense of I'm as I told you, I'm super excited about kind of my personal life and building a family and some of those roots. I'd say that's number one. Talked about, from my own soul and how I think about faith, I think is important for me at this at this moment, maybe more than ever. And then, how do you stay energized around work in a way that keeps you kind of driving transformation in organizations? I think what I've loved about the type of leaders that I got to work around the last 3-4 years in GE was a bunch of folks who joined the company, joined GE very different than I did. I chose to join GE out of graduate school. A lot of the leaders I worked with the last 3 or 4 years, they joined the company because their company was bought by GE.
Right.
And what I found in these leaders, and I admire them so much, was a huge desire to transform themselves, also to prove how good they were inside the company. And I loved this underdog mentality that the team had. But I love the transformation process that we went on as a team, and I want to work around people and peers who have a like mindset around that.
Sure. So I want to ask you, I don't want to forget to ask you this question, but what advice would you have for people who want to be more innovative at work, who want to...
Don't surround yourself with people like you.
Okay.
Don't surround in Greenville, good place for this. So in some way, if I found Africa, again, South Africa was a transformative place for me. Go hang out with artists. Go hang out with people that just have super different interests than you. What motivates them? What inspires them? And what I always felt like when I was surrounded by those type of people, is you leave refreshed and new ways to think about old problems in your own world. So I would say, let's not seek kind of solutions to your challenges by looking through the prism of your company or your industry. Go step in or surround yourself with different people. This community in Greenville, I think there's a lot of different things going on, and it relatively easily embrace to enter those different things. I would tell people who live here, just get involved with different things. It's easy in this community. And obviously it takes a different shape in cities like London or Zurich that are extremely, extremely multicultural. But most of my colleagues today, the guys I've spent the most time with, are German and French, and they have a different view of the world. They think about the world differently. They've been shaped by different world forces and have a different perspective on things, and I think that's helped me a ton.
So how do you want to be remembered, Andy?
Well, I don't even think about that because I feel so in the middle of. But I would say, I just left India, so maybe I can just say.
Sure, India.
A little bit about that. When I think about leaving India, and we had 2,000 people there every day, and what I would say is the way I want to be remembered there is that we set in motion a culture around delivering for customers, around accountability. What we always talked about was we're more accountable to one another than we are vertically. And what, to me, the way I would love to be remembered there is if someone's in that organization 5 years from now, that they still believe that those principles that we cared about, that drove such incredible performance the last couple of years, that those principles still imbued and infuse the way that we operate. I think as a leader, being remembered by just what you did during the years you were there is not enough. In a company like GE and institutions like Clemson and institutions like the church and civil service and government, I always describe it to a relay race. You're carrying a baton for a period of time. It's not about you. Your name's not on the front door. You took that baton from someone else and you hand it off. So if you think just along this prism of I'm in a job 24 months, 36 months, 72 months, whatever it is, that's the wrong way to think about it. You have to do some things that are enduring. And I hope that people look back and say some of the things that are about this company today we built when we were there. And hopefully people think, most times people remember how you made them feel.
Yes.
And hopefully people remember that that I made them feel like they could accomplish their biggest dreams.
I love that. Andy, tell me this. What question did I not ask you that I should have asked you?
Well, it's funny. The two things that didn't come up that are at least big changes from when I lived in Greenville. Number one, I'm a vegetarian.
Okay.
So, it's funny because I'm back here and, I love Bucky's barbecue and I love smoke on the water. But these are places like I love. But, I stopped eating meat and fish when I moved to India, which was really a life-changing decision. And
why did you make that decision?
It was so my partner and I went to a week-long kind of retreat, and at this amazing place. It wasn't. It was a nice retreat, at this amazing place in Rishikesh in kind of northern India.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that kind of the food was prepared there. We didn't eat meat and fish, and we felt great after a week.
Yeah.
I think you would feel great after a week at that retreat, irrespective of what you ate, but you feel great. And then we just said, hey, let's just not eat meat the rest of the trip and the rest of August. And then 30 days in, I felt a big difference.
Wow.
A big difference, and haven't looked back. And then I started yoga. Practice, and for me, that's been another thing that's just been fantastic from. Just how you feel, connecting sort of your thoughts and your body. It's a tremendous practice. So those two things are really different.
Good for you.
In Greenville, I woke up most days and would run 4 or 5 miles on the Swamp Rabbit Trail and love that. But my right knee doesn't love that as much as I used to love that. So
I understand.
Kind of spend my time doing other things. These days, but those are two things that for me were big changes, but I really have gotten a lot out of them.
Excellent. Well, Andy, thank you so much. It's great to sit down with you and catch
up. It's
up.
so nice to see you.
And so glad you're back in Greenville, and please come back and see us again.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.